Hey everyone, welcome to Lead Off, a show that aims to never bury the lead when talking about topics that matter the most. I am joined today by Hudson Taylor, our founder and executive director here at Athlete Ally. Hello, Huds.
Hey, Taylor. Happy Friday.
Okay, happy Friday. I want to start our conversation in Chicago with news related to Chicago Bears quarterback Caleb Williams. And perhaps unsurprisingly, it has nothing to do with football, but has to do with some of the criticism and conversation taking place online related to the fact that Caleb likes to paint his fingernails ahead of football games. If you're a diehard Bears fan, you probably know this fact. The casual football viewer became used to it during his rookie season last year, at least through the first half, where he would show up to every game rocking a different style painted nail. And he kicked off his sophomore campaign this year doing so again, this time with a bit of purpose behind it. Yeah, he had his nails painted with 988 across them, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, in the colors of suicide prevention work. And even though folks can rally behind that message, the idea that a starting quarterback in the NFL paints his nails different ways before games seemed to make people feel some type of way. So I want to talk about why that is, and what the root of some of that criticism is kind of foundationally within. And I think to start, there's a topic around what quote unquote acceptable masculinity looks like, right? Like, what does it mean to be an NFL player, a macho man in that league, and displaying what good or acceptable masculinity might look like? Thoughts?
Lots of thoughts. Well, first, I think that everybody on the internet at least is playing a global game of ad libs where we fill in the blank for whatever we think a person's motivation is or reasoning behind what they say, what they do. And I think that if two people were to answer that ad lib differently, you'd come to very different evaluative answers to that question, right? So yes, it doesn't surprise me that people are throwing shade at a masculine presenting athlete who's wearing nail polish, which they perceive as more feminine. Um, but I think that if they knew I'd like to think that if they knew the intent behind it was for a good cause and for a good reason, that would somehow offset their evaluation. um, Obviously, it shouldn't matter, right? Like, I think so much of what we are trying to create in the world is a expanding the boundaries of permissibility, of acceptance for yourself and for others. And certainly, anybody who's coming after a football player for either A, wearing nail polish, or B, wearing it for, you said, a suicide prevention
Yeah.
hotline, like, how could that be a bad thing? But I'll just also say that I think it's really important that athletes are able to uh, lean into that courage or that risk. We're talking about it right now. If he had done that same thing but put it on his shoelaces, I don't think it would have gotten any coverage or any attention. And
Mm.
so, sport is a space that socializes young men and young women around masculinity and femininity. And anytime an athlete bends or breaks the norms around gender, it causes friction for people. And I love that a player is using that friction to make a really important point about mental health and well-being. And I hope more people do it. And then the other thing I would just say is, like, a complete aside. There was a wrestler from University of Iowa, back in the '90s, named Jesse Whitmer, and he was a backup wrestler all throughout his career until I think it was his senior season, and he ended up getting the starting spot and was a national champion that year and was incredible. But Dan Gable was the coach at the time, and he remembered walking into the locker room and he saw Jesse Whitmer sitting in the locker room painting his toenails red. And Gable was like, "Jesse, like, what are you doing? What's going on here? And Jesse was just like, Coach, it reminds me of my girlfriend and it fires me up. Coach was like, okay, all right. So that's just to say, like, we evaluate people based off of what we think their intention or their motivation is behind a thing. And if you don't know that intention or that motivation, you might have a very different outlook or evaluation of that thing or that behavior. So anybody who on its surface is maybe questioning the painting of the nails, I really hope that when you recognize that it's certainly for awareness around suicide, it's something that you can not only be okay with, but really get behind and support.
Yeah, I think part of, if you look into the why for Caleb as well, he talks a lot about his upbringing, his mom being a nail technician, right? So he was around this creativity a lot. And it just kind of became natural, right? Like that this was a way that you could express something about yourself and say something through this creative medium. So it's also
Yep,
a part of his upbringing, right? And that identity.
that's cool. I'll also say for me personally, right, I am a happily mask presenting straight man, and yet I really want to find ways of having more feminine expression in my day-to-day life, and yet I feel like things that I might want to, like, have a more feminine flair, I'm like, ooh, like that feels too feminine, like I don't like that, doesn't really speak to. But painting of the nails is something that I feel like is like not it like it's appropriate, it's like not too femme, but it's femme enough to actually like bend but not break a gender role there. So I'm all about it, and you know what, maybe I'm gonna paint my nails this week.
I
Let's
was
do
going
it.
to say for our next lead off segment, I expect you to come with painted nails.
Let's go. Absolutely.
I do want to get your thoughts on, making somewhat of the connection between what we're seeing and hearing here and our work. Because I think one of the things that we also talk about is homophobia and transphobia being weapons of sexism, right? And some of that inherent masculinity and the definition of good and bad translates into some of the homophobia and transphobia we see in sport, right? It's rooted in some of those sexist beliefs around what is appropriate masculinity, what is appropriate femininity. So for maybe someone just watching to understand, like, why is Athlete Ally talking about this? What is the connection to the work? I think there's a
Uh,
through line that's really important there.
Absolutely. So one of the most important Supreme Court decisions recently when it comes to LGBTQ rights is the Bostock decision. And in it, that protected LGBTQ people on based on employment. And in that ruling, they said that you cannot discriminate against an LGBTQ person, but for on the basis of sex, right? The reason why we have a person would have animus towards a gay person being attracted to somebody of the same sex is because of their sex, right? So you can't get to anti LGBTQ attitudes but through what you think is the right or wrong ways of being a man or being a woman, right?
Mm.
And so sport becomes a very interesting and important uh, platform for that conversation, because sport, unlike any other sector of society, socializes young men into how to become young boys, how to become men, young girls how to become women. We have sport is coded with gender throughout, right? We have arbitrary ways in which the rules of men's sport tries to masculinize male athletes, and the rules and the dress and the ritual of women's sports tries to feminize female athletes, right? And so very actually every single time an athlete is stepping onto their field of play, they are coming into contact with gender roles that are being put on them by their sport. As you climb the sports ladder, you begin to you initially wear that thing like a jacket, right? It's something that you're taught, it's something that you're tapping into, but over time, the athletes who perform the best are often the ones who abide the most. right? They're the people who have said, okay, I'm going to do away with all my hobbies. I'm going to minimize my sort of my distractions in my life, and I'm really going to commit to this culture, these goals, and this is going to be my path. And so what ends up happening is as you climb that athletic ladder, that coat that you wear that you opted into becomes your skin. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about this work is, as a wrestler, there was a lot of ways in which I wore a certain type of masculinity because it was what I thought I needed to be successful, to be accepted. I needed to like certain things that I had no interest in actually liking.
Mm.
And I think that as you get to the top of that competitive pyramid, you then start to look around and say, well, wait a second. I get to decide who I am. I get to decide how I want to live my life, how I want to treat people. And that's when some of those barriers that have been put up for you, you can start to actively put down. And so I think we see it with athletes at an elite level. There are also some of the ones that have started to subvert or bend the rules that have been given to them in really beautiful ways. Um, so yeah, these two things are intimately tied together. I think that also sport is the space that teaches social ideas about the differences between men and women. There is sort of this like biological essentialism that sport embeds in people because we sex segregate sports at like 5 years old. One of the worst things that I could think about when I was a little boy was losing to a little girl. If I lost to a little girl in a wrestling match, it was like a dagger to my masculinity. And so the structure of sport is creating those ideas. And anytime an athlete tries to bend or break or play with the boundaries that have been given to us around gender, around masculinity, around femininity, it is something that is beautiful. It should be celebrated, and it's something that I'd hope more athletes would try to emulate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fair to say Caleb's painting of the nails with or without message is one of a beautiful example of how to subvert that those boundaries.